You're listening to the Black Eagles podcast with Sinan Schwarting and Kaan Bayazit.
Quaresma ortayı yaptı. Sekti. Gol! 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 Maç boyunca durdu, şimdi attı. Abubakar attı. Abubakar. Bir tarih yazıyor Beşiktaş.
Hello Black Eagles fans and Turcoholics joining us from Football a la Turca. Thank you very much for listening to this episode featuring Beşiktaş's Europa League campaign. Beşiktaş were drawn in Group K of the UEFA Europa League, coming out of Pot 1. From Pot 2 they got SC Braga, from Pot 3 they got Wolverhampton Wanderers, and finally from Pot 4 they got Slovan Bratislava. Today we'll be taking a closer look at all of those teams, but before we get to that, please go over to the Football a la Turca feed and go and check out our UEFA Europa League Group C and Group J previews featuring Trabzonspor and Beşiktaş here, and also be on the lookout for our Champions League Group A preview, which features Galatasaray. That one comes out in the weekend. On the 15th we will be releasing that. Galatasaray have a very tough group with Paris Saint-Germain, Real Madrid and Club Brugge from Belgium, and we have of course expert analysts coming onto the show for those. For the Beşiktaş and Trabzonspor groups, we did the exact same thing. We had some really great guests on. I want to thank all of those people for coming on and giving us their time and expert analysis of the teams involved in those Europa League groups. But of course, for further details, please go over to the Football a la Turca feed, where you can find both of those episodes. Highly recommend listening to those. And of course, give Football a la Turca a subscribe, 5-star review, and do the same for the Black Eagles podcast. If you came here from Football a la Turca and you're maybe a Beşiktaş fan, or you don't even have to be a Beşiktaş fan but just interested in Beşiktaş and want to hear a little bit more in-depth stuff every week on Beşiktaş, give us a subscribe and drop us a 5-star review. It would be greatly appreciated and it helps us a long way. If you want to support the Black Eagles podcast or Football a la Turca, you can head to www.patreon.com/falt, F-A-L-T, and you can pledge your support on Patreon. Or of course, like I said before, you can always support either podcast by just giving us reviews, sharing with your friends and family, and just spreading the word on both Football a la Turca and the Black Eagles podcast. Thank you all for listening to this episode, and we're going to head straight into it with Bruno Bottaro covering Beşiktaş, because it would be a little bit ridiculous for me to interview myself. Beşiktaş were drawn in Group K of the Europa League, and Beşiktaş were in Pot 1. And here to tell us a little bit more about Beşiktaş is Bruno Bottaro of DAZN Italy. But Bruno, of course, loves Turkish football, has covered Turkish football for years, and he as well lived in Turkey for a brief while and worked for TRT World. Bruno, thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you very much.
And obviously I didn't want to interview myself because that would be a little bit weird, so that's why I invited Bruno on to give us a neutral perspective on Beşiktaş, especially for those of you listening who may support one of the other teams in the group, like Wolverhampton, Braga, or Slovan Bratislava. Bruno, let's start off with Beşiktaş then from Pot 1. How did Beşiktaş manage to qualify for the Europa League? They did not have to play qualifiers, of course. How did they do last season in the Turkish league? Just briefly tell us how they managed to qualify for the Europa League, please.
Well, yeah, last season for Beşiktaş was a bit complicated because I believe they were the best team in the league. They were strong. They were also quite fun to watch. But the problem was they were at the end of the cycle. And at the end of a kind of experience with their coach Şenol Güneş, that was already becoming the coach of the national team. So the club and the players were quite not performing in the best way. Why do I say also the club? Because it's quite said and known that the players were not paid on time for most of the time last season. and that may have been also a factor in the final run for the title that saw Galatasaray winning the league and Başakşehir second and Beşiktaş third. Not a great distance between those three clubs, but Beşiktaş paid the first part of the season that was quite poor, both in the league and in Europe. And then in the second part of the league, the club improved also thanks to Burak Yılmaz that was bought, and he brought a lot to the club, a lot of goals especially. And anyway, the first part of the season was really poor, and this is why Beşiktaş didn't win the title probably, and this is why also they fell out of favor with the coach Şenol Güneş. Now for Beşiktaş, it's a new era because they have a new coach, and it looks like also the players are paid on time, so things are quite better. In that way, some players were finally sold, like Ricardo Quaresma, that was quite huge like weight because he was paid a lot of money, and new players came in to get some fresh air. The club, I think, successfully managed to get some alternatives to Quaresma and to that was also poorly performing last season. So there is some new blood that still needs to be taxed, and new players like Nkudu, Boyd, and Yabi in the wings. They are bringing fresh air, I believe, and they're quite interesting to watch. And it will be interesting to see if they will perform at like what the fans expect. In the midfield, I think that there is Mohamed Elneny from Arsenal, and Abdullah Avcı will have a lot to work on. Because still Beşiktaş looks like a kind of open site. It's still a work in progress, and there is stuff to do. The team did not impress anyone in the first match days. They got 4 points out of 3 matches, and they lost very badly in Sivas at the opening match day. But now things are a little bit getting better, but a bit slowly, because Beşiktaş didn't win also against Rizespor, and so I don't think things will be bad for Beşiktaş during the season. But there were a few injuries that got everything a little bit more complicated. So there is a lot to work on, that's sure. And also Abdullah Avcı as coach proved to be very good for Başakşehir starting from the second season. Now he's putting all the foundations to the project, a project that needs time. But if Beşiktaş will give him time, we'll have fun.
And we see that already. I think that I believe we spoke a couple of months ago on the show about, well, not that long ago actually, about Abdullah Avcı, and you told me that his first step is going to be to improve the team defensively and build from the back, and we can see that, I think, especially in this last match against Rizespor. A very unfortunate 1-1 draw for Beşiktaş, but in the first half especially, Beşiktaş were very impressive in terms of their pressing game. They were recovering the ball within 5.8 seconds in the first half. It was really impressive to see. But unfortunately, Beşiktaş have some issues up front. You mentioned Burak Yılmaz. He is injured right now, but he will probably, hopefully, be fit for these Europa League group stage matches. But talk a little bit more about how Beşiktaş transformed the team, because they went from an older team as well, like Başakşehir, for example, like Galatasaray, who have a lot of 30-plus-year-old players. Beşiktaş have gone from a team that had almost all the starters were 30-plus years old, except for maybe 2 or so, like Adem Laiç, who was also permanently retained. But now Beşiktaş have brought in a lot of new players, 7 new players. All 7 are really players I think they got for the first team, not necessarily to sit on the bench. I think they're all potential starters. And except for Victor Ruiz, who they got from Villarreal, who's 30 years old, I think all of them are younger than 28. Most of them are in their mid-20s. How do you see those new pieces, like a Tyler Boyd, like a Nkudu, like Rebocho, like a Douglas? How do you see those guys, and Elneny, of course, how do you see them fit in, and who are they replacing, and how do you expect Beşiktaş to play in the coming weeks as the Abdullah Avcı's tactics start to settle in?
Yeah, it can look a little bit like late, but Victor Ruiz is the real replacement for Pepe, actually, because Pepe left at the beginning of the last season because he wasn't paid and there were financial issues for the club. So he was released, and the club didn't find a true replacement for him. At least it's also Gary Medel that could have played in the defense, but also Gary Medel left to Bologna. So Victor Ruiz has a huge task, and he will need to be fundamental for the team. He and Enzo Rocco, that wasn't so impressive last season, and he will need to step to the next level also, because Enzo Rocco is a 27 years old Chilean defender, and he will need to improve also. Victor Ruiz is a bit more experienced, so I can see Ruiz and Domagoj Vida starting as players in the starting 11, and Enzo Rocco as a backup for them. But also interesting to see in the as left back and right back what's happening, because the two Turkish players that were there and are still there, Caner Erkin and Gökhan Gönül, are getting more than 30 years old. So the management successfully brought in two new players, Pedro Rebocho as left back and Douglas as right back. Douglas from Barcelona, but he already has had an experience with Turkish side Sivasspor. So Pedro Rebocho from I believe Enavangan in France instead, and but he's Portuguese. So it's like two new players. Pedro Rebocho is born in 1995, and Douglas is born in 1990. So it's a new blood, as I was saying before. And it's much needed for the team that those players will fit in the playing squads. Even though Abdullah Avcı likes Caner Erkin because he coached him already many times in the Turkish national team young selections and then in the Turkey national team, I think his aim will be to play Rebocho in a long term. Now he's starting a lot Caner Erkin more, but if he wants to have like that defensive stability he lost in his teams, Abdullah Avcı will need to fit the new players as soon as possible. All the new players, including Mohamed El-Neni, that is also replacing Medel partially, because El-Neni is the kind of defensive midfielder that is much needed for the construction of the game, and also is much younger than Gary Medel. So he's born in 1992, if I'm not wrong, and he will also bring a massive amount of Egyptian fans that are really, really nice in social media, and bringing huge support to Beşiktaş. Beşiktaş were having that kind of effect with the Shinji Kagawa last season, with a lot of Japanese people interested in the club. Now it will be with Egyptian people interested in the club, but this is not bringing, of course, immediate results from a point of view in a Europa League group stage, because this is a difficult group. I believe Beşiktaş were pretty unlucky getting Wolverhampton. That was probably the hardest pick in that kind of pot, because it was really
pottery.
Yeah, I think that was the worst.
Yeah, it's a club that spent like 300 million euros in the last couple of years, so it's pretty crazy if you think about it. But who would you point out? Of course, there's lots of new players now, but who do you point out if you had to pick one or two guys as the absolute key players for this team who are going to be essential for Beşiktaş in the Europa League, in your opinion?
Victor Ruiz will need to be absolutely important in a short-term perspective also, because for Douglas and Rebocho probably Abdullah Avcı will rely on Caner Erkin, that is like the man he knows pretty well, and so it depends. Maybe for Rebocho we will wait a lot of time, at least until January, I believe. But I see Victor Ruiz being very, very important and decisive also in the first matches. El-Neni, I don't know, because even though he has a massive experience of Europa League football, in the midfield, as followers of Turkish football, we already saw usually Dorukhan Tököz, Atiba Hutchinson also many times. So I don't know if Eleni will be decisive. The other very decisive player will be Adem Ljajic, because he has been decisive for Beşiktaş in the last matches. He has been decisive last season, so he will need to play, I guess. It will be very surprising if Abdullah will field the second team also with Beşiktaş, not just with Başakşehir. He would get a lot of critics for that. So I don't see him doing this kind of things he was doing for Başakşehir, and this will maybe prove that there was a management decision. So I will see also Jermaine Lens. I think he will play in Europe, even though he has lots of other players in his role, like Abdullah Diaby, Tyler Boyd, and George Nkudu. Beşiktaş will have a lot of new wingers, so it will be quite interesting to see. It's quite a little bit of a mystery, because Abdullah was relying a lot on one player in Başakşehir, Edin Visca, and he was a key player for him. The wingers were key players at Başakşehir. So I think also Lens can be that kind of experienced player with experience in Europe. He was quite important also last season for Beşiktaş, even though the group stage didn't end well. He was able to score a few vital goals to keep Beşiktaş in the race.
Particularly against Sarpsborg, I think, where he turned the match around.
He was fundamental, I believe, to keep Beşiktaş at least in the race until the final very, very bad match against Malmö at home. That was quite a shame for the whole club. But as you already said, Burak Yılmaz needs to get back on the pitch as soon as possible, because Beşiktaş has another player, that is Güven Yalçın, and also Umut Nayır coming from Bursaspor. They're two young players, but they don't have the experience to start already as like they did. And also the Güven Yalçın scored and had the chance to be important, but it's not like having a target man and an experienced one like Burak Yılmaz. Burak Yılmaz will be fundamental for the team, and Adem Ljajic and Victor Ruiz will need to be the core of the team. Another player that is the core of the team already and has experience is Domagoj Vida. If he and Victor Ruiz will find the right, chemistry to be the real couple in the back, like Vida was with Pepe in a European campaign of Beşiktaş that was the best probably in the last years, the one of the Champions League they have, and the one in which they won the group. So they can have a successful European stage, and I think they can get through with also Wolverhampton, that I see as the other team going through this group. If they don't get this chemistry, it's a pretty risky group, because it's much more difficult than last season group for Beşiktaş. Last season was very easy as group, and Beşiktaş didn't manage to go through because it was their fault. That's my opinion, of course. Then also they also had like very worthy Belgian opponents, but
Genk were, I think, better than Braga are probably, and maybe not quality-wise, or individual quality-wise, maybe not better than Wolves, but I think with Wolves, now you know what you're going to get, and I think they're going to be the favorite. Maybe Beşiktaş were a little arrogant when they played Genk for the first time. I think
they were really arrogant with everyone this season. Yeah, that's the problem.
Especially if you compare the first match at Vodafone Park, I think Beşiktaş and Şenol Güneş kind of expected, we'll beat these guys. But then in the second match, after they got beaten 1-4 at home, in Genk, they played a lot better, and they actually were like 1-0 up until like the 89th minute, but then they got an equalizer and then they almost lost another time, so Genk were definitely a worthy opponent.
And also, the problem was with Malmö, by the way, because they didn't value Malmö enough. I believe they didn't play as they should have played. Yeah. And it was a very bad first half of the season. That was...
Yeah, and with Braga and with Wolves, you have, of course, two clubs that I think they won't underestimate. Slovan Bratislava is another question. Will they underestimate Slovan Bratislava? We'll have to wait and see. But Bruno, quickly, please, your pick for the final standings in this group.
I see Wolverhampton winning the group, Beşiktaş getting second, and Sporting Braga getting third, Slovan Bratislava getting fourth. But it's up to Beşiktaş. They will need to get their current game a little bit better, or Otherwise, what's happening is Sporting Braga are having second, and that would be massively bad for Turkish football.
And finally, do you have any fun travel trips for fans of maybe Braga Wolves? I'm sure the English fans will be traveling, and maybe even fans of Bratislava. Do you have any fun tips for them if they're going to go to the Beşiktaş away game? What should they definitely go and do when they're in Istanbul?
Well, probably it's not like super recommended to go to Beşiktaş or Ortaköy with your jersey on. Usually people are like super friendly in Istanbul, but I don't recommend to go to Ortaköy or Beşiktaş during those couple of days. I would recommend to stay in Galata in that kind of area, because that's a really fun and nice area, especially in the night, drinking. You can have a lot of fun. I recommend a place that is called Balkon Restaurant and Bar, that has one of the best views, and they didn't pay me for this kind of thing I'm saying. That's like quite hidden as place, but the 7th floor is like one of the best rooftop experience you will have. It's not expensive, and that's one of the best places you can go and experience the city. At the same time, I would recommend to go to a Turkish meyhane. Meyhane, it's like a tapas bar in Spain, and I know English fans would love that kind of experience especially, and because they love it when they go to Spain, so why not loving the same experience that would cost you less than half of the same amount of money? So also visit the basic stuff like Hagia Sophia. I would always recommend that, because it's one of the best places in the world for history and everything else. Also, I don't know how much time would you spend for an away game, maybe just 1-2 days. So just see the basic stuff. If you're staying in Galata, don't miss the view from Galata Tower. And that's an area of Galatasaray fans mainly, usually, so you will get very good treatment. If you go also to Istiklal streets, you will get a lot of friendly people, friendly faces, because they will support you in spite of Turkish football and the UEFA ranking points. Everyone will be very friendly with you, because that's how in Turkey it goes. The hospitality is massive, it's amazing. And Istanbul is one of the best cities in the world, probably the best city in the world in my opinion. So let's go and enjoy it, because it's a huge chance to do it. It's something that you will remember for the rest of your life. So also Beşiktaş Stadium away is one of the best experience you can have. It's pretty loud when you go there. I was almost deaf going out of that stadium. So it's one of the must go stadiums in the world. So yeah, you have to go.
Yeah, and when you're there, of course, go visit the club his museum, which is at the stadium. You can get a tour from the stadium as well. There's tours for tourists. I don't know if they actually have English tours, so
they don't have English tours, I can confirm.
That's unfortunate.
They have. That's unfortunate, of course. But that's one of the best tours. It's of course the best tour in Turkey, and one of the best tours I had in the stadium, because they also have a massive museum, and in which there is like a VR experience, virtual reality travel with a roller coaster in a stadium. That's something I never saw in other football club museums. So yeah, that's also a must go.
And the Dolmabahce Palace, of course, straight across the Vodafone Park.
Yeah.
So must do. If you have the opportunity, please come to Beşiktaş. Bruno, Bottaro, thank you very much for your insights on Beşiktaş, and please enjoy the rest of the episode. And from pot 2 is SC Braga from Portugal. Beşiktaş fans will of course be familiar with Braga, as we met in the 2010-2011 Europa League campaign. And joining me live right now from Portugal is Luís Crístovão, a Portuguese football journalist and also commentator for Eleven Sports and for the public radio in Portugal. Luís, thank you very much for joining us and giving us your insights on SC Braga.
Thank you. I'm very happy to talk about Braga and of course Beşiktaş because these connections between Portuguese and Turkish football are so big and so intense that it's always good and by some way expected to have some matches between Portugal and Turkey every season.
Yeah, it's crazy if you think about it. I think Beşiktaş played Benfica, then Porto, and then last year no Portuguese opponents. So that was very unordinary for us. We're used to playing against Portuguese opponents, and Beşiktaş have played against Sporting in recent years, of course, against Porto, and like I mentioned, we've played Porto multiple times, Sporting then 3 years ago, and then Braga in the beginning of the decade. So so many Portuguese opponents for Beşiktaş, and not just for Beşiktaş. Galatasaray have played Benfica in recent history, of course. So we're familiar with them. Oh, and of course Fenerbahce have a trauma with Braga too a couple of years ago with their Ivan Bebek referee trauma they got there. But I'm sure that will be remembered differently in Portugal. But believe me, that's a huge deal for Fenerbahce fans to this date because of that ref. But we're here to talk about Sporting Braga, and this is not the only team with a Portuguese connection, of course, because we have also Wolverhampton in this group, which have a massive Portuguese connection.
It's almost a Portuguese team too.
Yeah, it really is. They have an absurd amount of Portuguese players, and then of course a Portuguese coach. So this is going to be a very interesting group for Sporting Braga. Beşiktaş for the first time in a long time, not a huge Portuguese connection. Ricardo Quaresma, of course, just left the club near the end of the deadline. But Pedro Rebocho, former Benfica youth player, is at the club right now, and I believe he's the only Portuguese player at the club at the moment. So
I think you have other players that played in Portugal, but they're not Portuguese, like Diaby, who played in Sporting, and Tyler Boyd. Who played Guimarães and Tondela. Yes,
exactly. So we have a little bit of a Portuguese connection still, but not the most direct one like we used to have when we had Simão, Fernandes, of course Quaresma, Almeida. There were bigger Portuguese times for Beşiktaş. But let's talk about Sporting Braga for the time being. How did Braga manage to qualify for the Europa League this season? How did they do domestically in the Portuguese Liga NOS last season?
Well, they are the fourth Portuguese team. You can say that Benfica and Porto are the title contenders every season, and I think there's a gap between those two and the other teams. Sporting is usually the third big team in Portugal, and Braga is trying to get them. So Braga is by now a very strong fourth team. Last season they finished in fourth place, even if their president and their former coach Abel Ferreira, who is now at PAOK in Greece, in the start of the season they talk a little bit about trying to be champions, but in reality it seems almost impossible. So they finished fourth, 7 points behind Sporting and 15 points ahead of Vitória Guimarães. So it's like when the season starts, if you say Braga will end in the fourth place, I think this is a very secure bet. Maybe they can try to challenge for third place, but it's not easy, and you almost have no chances of finding a team that will get from fifth to fourth. So that's the way they qualified. Portugal have the third place and the cup winner was the same. So Sporting grabbed the direct qualification for the groups, and Braga had to pass 2 rounds. They met Brøndby from Denmark in the last qualifying round. It was, I wouldn't say an easy game or an easy contender for them, but they made it look easier, because in Denmark in the first game they were losing 2-1 and they won 4-2 in the end of the match. So scoring 4 goals in Denmark was more than enough to have a second match that was very soft for Braga. They won again. In the playoff, they met Spartak Moscow, and we were probably expecting a lot more difficulties for Braga, because Spartak had more matches in the Russian league. Braga was starting the season here in Portugal. They won 1-0 in Braga in the first match, and then in the second match, Sapinto, the Braga coach, in the league match between the two Spartak matches, he has changed all his team, so almost no players in the starting 11 between the Portuguese league match and the Spartak match. And in Moscow, Ricardo Horta made a fantastic match, and they won 2-0 in Russia. That was fantastic, and I think a bit unexpected, but at the same time it showed how Braga can be a very strong team when they are focused on the European goals. So I think those 2 matches with Spartak might be the ones that Beşiktaş fans and technical team would like to pay more attention to, try to understand how Braga might play in the group phase.
Yeah, and the coach Sapinto is of course a very fiery personality, very similar to Porto coach Sergio Conceição, who has that very fiery temperament too. We saw Sapinto in Belgium here at Standard Luik. He was a very a good coach, I would say, but controversial perhaps. Did some funny things. But how can you explain him as a coach in terms of tactical prowess? How does he have Braga play, and what are Braga's main strengths and perhaps weaknesses that Beşiktaş and Wolverhampton and maybe Slovan Bratislava will have to look to exploit if they want to get points from Braga?
Yes, you pointed to Sapinto's personality, and I think that is a big talking point about him, because like Sergio Conceição, the Porto coach, they were both players that had this kind of fire in them, very intense players, and they pass those qualities as players to coaches. I think Sapinto, in these moments, is much more calm than he was like 5 or 6 years ago when he worked here in Portugal. I think it probably helped him to have experiences outside Portugal, because in Greece and in Belgium he had to face the shock between his personality and contest people that didn't know him. In Portugal, if you say Sapinto, everybody will remember how he was like as a player, and we are all ready to see the Sapinto screaming and running in the bench. But he learned. I think he's much more mature now, and at Braga he has a big opportunity of showing his qualities as coach, and he has a big opportunity to get results, to get a cup win or something like that. That will make him a better coach and a more respectable coach. Braga last season was already a very strong team, but I think it lacked a bit of that ability to risk. You understand? This the things that Braga showed against Brøndby and Spartak Moscow, I think this could only happen with Sapinto. approach of those games, because he's really making Braga a more aggressive team. They are an aggressive team defending, a team that's like to press very high, and will try during long periods of the match. Will try to press the player with the ball, and they're a very dangerous team when they work in transition mode. So there's one player that wasn't in the group last season, André Horta, that is decisive for this approach. I think he's a very important player, probably the Braga star. He played in Benfica, he played in Braga. After that, he had a small period playing in the United States in LAFC. That didn't go very well to him. So this season he's back to Braga, and he's immediately showing how good he is and how influent he is. He and his brother, Ricardo Horta, are the two main players in Braga. André Horta playing more like a number 10, attacking midfielder, but with lots of freedom to check for spaces. You can find him near the defensive line in the first phase of construction, trying to get the ball and to go with the ball in the field. You can find him in the area, almost like a striker. Ricardo Horta is more of a winger, but both Braga wingers will always be very keen to search spaces in the central area. So Braga, in paper, you can say they will play their attacking mode with a 4-3-3, and in defensive mode in 4-4-2. But they really are a very dynamic team. They really are a team that is hard to defend, because they are very, very intense. And I think that you'll see in Braga some of these qualities of Sapinto, and at the same time some of the qualities you usually find in Portuguese players. The Horta brothers are very talented players, and they really, I'm not saying Braga isn't a big team or a very good team, but they really have ability to play in bigger teams, in bigger leagues. So their strengths, I will say that's their talent and their speed, and André Horta as a big star. In the defensive line, they have Bruno Viana. He's a Brazilian defender that is also a very interesting player and will function as a leader in the team. As for their weaknesses, I think in this moment Braga is lacking a real striker, a real goal scorer. They have two main options. Hassan, the Egyptian player, that I think his characteristics are the ones that Sapinto is looking for, like a goal scorer, a player that likes to be in the area, trying to play, like responding for all the play that the wingers and the attacking midfields creates, but is not good enough. And then you have Paulinho, that is an excellent player, but is not a goal scorer. He's more like a second forward that will try to enter the dynamics of the team, but not really a number 9. So I think they're lacking here a striker, and also in the midfield, I think they're lacking two really defensive midfielder that can give some quality to their game. So they have Palhinha, that is on loan for Sporting. Is a very good defensive midfielder, but he lacks some qualities when having the ball. And the other option is Claudemir, Brazilian, that is a little bit better with the ball, but not so good as a defensive player. So there, I think there might be some space for Beşiktaş to try to explore some errors. And also, we'll have to see if Braga will really make his bets on European competitions, because for a Portuguese team to play Thursdays and then Sunday or Monday night, it's hard, and this will probably make Sapinto try to do a lot of changes in the starting 11 in some matches, and it will depend a little bit if Braga is playing a team from the a not so good team in the Portuguese league. Maybe he'll make those changes in Sunday. But if Braga is playing Benfica or Porto or Sporting or Vitória Guimarães, they'll have to keep their best players to that game, and maybe Sapinto will make some changes during the Europa League match. But I think this is the kind of problem that you'll find in every team. You have to be a bit lucky to play with your opponents the day they are not so focused. So I think that is probably one of the most emotional things about Europa League, is that you are never sure if the stronger team is really stronger in that day. So we'll see with Sapinto what will be his choices for this group.
Yeah, and it's like you rightfully pointed out. I think it's a question for the big three clubs in this group mainly. How focused will they be on the Europa League? And even for Slovan Bratislava, maybe they will prioritize another league title over the Europa League group stages. They already achieved their goal of getting to those group stages. Beşiktaş and Wolverhampton, they may also be putting more focus on their domestic competition. It all depends a little bit. Wolverhampton may aim for a Champions League ticket next season. That'll obviously be very difficult in the Premier League, but they have a very talented team, so maybe that's their goal, and maybe they'll take the Europa League a little less serious, or maybe they underestimate Braga or Beşiktaş. I doubt that they would underestimate Braga given their Portuguese connection. But
yes.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. This was a very tough draw, I think, with arguably the toughest team coming out of Pot 3, which is a recurring theme in this episode. But it's just the truth. I think this is the club that most teams would have wanted to avoid, because Wolverhampton, obviously a team with fantastic talent, very good coach. It's going to be tough to see and to predict who's going to end on top, who's going to end bottom. Is maybe a little bit easier, with all due respect for Slovan Bratislava, although they can surprise someone. But I'm going to ask you anyway to give us your predictions for the final standings in this group, and in general, how you feel that Braga will handle this group.
Well, I think looking at the context of the four teams in their national leagues, I would say that Wolverhampton is the stronger team in the group, because they cannot have a much higher goal in Premier League than last season when they finished 7th. It's very hard to be stronger than that, and if they manage to win some good points during those next weeks, and they have no problems in the table. If they are mid-table in Premier League, they can focus on Europa League with no problem. They have very good players. They have a coach that knows very well Portuguese football. He has also experiences both as a head coach and as assistant coach with Jesualdo Ferreira, also in Greece. So he'll be very familiarized too with Beşiktaş. I think that he'll have no problem to understand how the team plays. And I would say that Wolverhampton might be a team that really wants to get their main goal in Europa League. Saying that, I would see Beşiktaş and Braga fighting for the second place, but for both of them, it's very important what's happening in their national competitions. So their choices and their options in Europa League will be very influenced by what happens in the National League. If Beşiktaş or Braga have some problems and they're not in the place they usually want to be, Beşiktaş fighting for championship and Braga in the fourth place, they might have some pressure to forget the Europa League dates. You have to win in the league, and that might be a problem. Slovan Bratislava, I think, is the kind of teams that every year you see one of these teams getting big results in group phases. I understand that playing Wolverhampton, Braga and Beşiktaş is very, very hard for the Slovaks, but I don't see them really having a big problem in their league, because we might say that even if they lose 4 or 5 points until December, there will be no big problems to get back to the first place after that, after February. So Slovan will probably be playing with their best teams every group phase matches, and they will not be the easiest of the teams to face. They will not be the team that is just happy to be here. All the other teams have to pay attention, and in the end, it might be those 2 or 3 points you lose to Slovan that would make the difference if you get one of the first places, first or second place, or if you stay out of Europe in December.
And then finally, Luís, please, do you have any good tips for fans who decide to make the trip to Portugal to go and check out the away match against Braga, Wolverhampton, Beşiktaş, or Bratislava fans? Obviously, the stadium in itself is something to behold. With the stadium being built in a stone quarry, it's one of the most impressive stadiums in Europe. But is there anything else that you can, a tip you can give to fans who are traveling?
Yeah, so you'll be playing in Braga in November. So one thing you have to understand is that it will be cold in the Braga stadium. It's a very beautiful stadium, but every people, Braga fans and all the fans that visit Braga, will tell you that it's very cold, especially in winter. In November, you have to be prepared for that. Braga, the city of Braga, is in the region of Minho, probably one of the prettiest regions in Portugal, with a lot of interests in small villages and the natural aspect of the region. If you like nature, if you like to see green fields, you have to go 1 or 2 days sooner and try to know the region. it's a very good region to eat and to drink. So you'll find very good places to have this menu experience. At the same time, if you are more of a city guy, you can stay in Porto. It's not far from Braga, and Porto is really a very historical and touristic city too, that you might know from other visits to Portugal. But you can really stay in Porto for 1 or 2 days and get to know the city center, and then Braga in the match day will be enough to know the city and to visit the stadium. That is really a very good place to take pictures, because it's a very pretty stadium.
Thank you, Luís Crístovão of Eleven Sports, for your insights on SC Braga, and we will be continuing our Group K preview with Wolverhampton coming up next. And from pot 3 in Group K came the club that probably everyone wanted to avoid from pot 3, Wolverhampton Wanderers, or rather Wolves. And here to inform us a little bit more about Wolves is Alex Dicken from Birmingham Live. He's a reporter on Wolves. Alex, thank you for joining us on the show.
No problem.
So Alex, how did Wolves manage to qualify for the Europa League group stages? First, tell us a little bit about their campaign in the Premier League last season, and then how they managed to get to the qualifiers this season.
So they were obviously promoted in the 2017-18 season from the Championship to the Premier League. It was Nuno's first season in charge, ran away with the Championship. Everyone kind of obviously was hoping they'd just survive in the Premier League, but given the players they had already, Neves, Diogo Jota, and they added some brilliant players last summer in João Moutinho, Rui Patricio, players that have, graced grander stages in the Europa League. There was a slight expectation that, I think I spoke to Raul Jimenez at the end of the season. He was one of the players who joined, and he was saying from about October onwards they realised they were much more than a team that was going to be fighting relegation. So eventually they finished 7th. It was a bit dramatic because they obviously played in the FA Cup semi-final, lost to Watford when they really should have won. They were 2-0 up with 11 minutes to go and lost 3-2 after extra time. Watford played the FA Cup final against Man City, ended up losing, so that ended up with Wolves qualifying for the Europa League as virtually finishing 7th, and they obviously had to go through the qualifying campaign, which everyone in this country always kind of looks at and thinks, oh, that's going to be a really, really tough ask, and their Premier League form will dip as a result. So far, they have struggled in the Premier League start with 3 draws in 4 games. Not the end of the world. I mean, they've played some difficult games, but in the Europa League qualifiers, it's been fantastic. They've completely blown away Crusaders 6-1 over 2 legs. Again, a non-league, well, not a non-league, a half and half. They've got half part-time players and half full-time players. Crusaders did themselves justice, but Wolves were obviously too strong. FC Punic, the Armenian side, is a bit of a jaunt for us all to get there, but Wolves blew them away 4-0 both legs. And then they found a really kind of top-class opponent in the playoff round, which obviously we expected, in Torino, Serie A side who finished 7th in their league last year, 7th against 7th. It was a really, really kind of closely fought encounter over 2 legs. The first game in Torino, Wolves went 2-0 up and then pretty much gave Torino a route back into the game at 2-1, grabbed another Raul Jimenez, who's been absolutely magnificent in the Europa League so far, 6 goals, 6 games. Taking his form into last season, into this season, been fantastic. And then we thought it was all over. They gave a sloppy penalty away right at the death. Belotti scores it, and that's 3-2. Wolves still massive favourites going into the second leg, but Torino obviously had a chance, and thankfully Wolves got the job done at Molineux 2-1. And going into the draw last week, we're obviously hoping for a draw that we could look at and think Wolves could get through, and I think we've landed that. 2 difficult opponents in that group, we think, in Braga and Beşiktaş, but you would expect, looking at the squads of the 4 teams and Slovan Bratislava as well, that Wolves and probably Beşiktaş will come through it.
Yeah, and you already made mention of a couple of those big names, like Raul Jimenez, who we of course all know from his time at Benfica, the Mexican international. But there's a lot of Portuguese players. There's a Portuguese coach, and obviously Jorge Mendes is involved in the club one way or another. And you already alluded to João Moutinho earlier, who of course we all know from his time for the Portuguese national team, his time at Monaco, FC Porto, I believe. Fantastic footballer. But which other players would you highlight that maybe people aren't super familiar yet, who aren't like the biggest Premier League fans, for example, and don't follow the Portuguese league, for example? Are there some players you could say, well, these guys you'll have to watch out for?
Yeah, this season so far, I mean, it's kind of come out of nowhere. Adama Traoré, you probably heard of him, a Spanish winger, came through the ranks at Barcelona and La Masia, stayed there till he was 19, joined Aston Villa, another local team here, didn't do so well in the Premier League in his first season there, then left and went to Middlesbrough. Struggled in his first season, was okay, and then he completely ripped the Championship up in his second season. Nuno, they played Middlesbrough, who he played for, played Wolves in the 2017-18 season of the Championship towards the end, and although Wolves won the game, he absolutely ripped them apart, and Nuno fell in love with him and signed him the following summer, 18 million. It was a record transfer before it was broken for Jimenez early this year. And Adama didn't play much in his first season, didn't start many games, mainly left to play cup games, and Nuno couldn't really find a role for him in his 3-5-2 system, because obviously Adama's a natural winger and Wolves don't really play with wingers. But over the summer they worked together on the training ground. Nuno's kind of reinvented him as a wing back, a right wing back, and he's been absolutely phenomenal so far this season. He's already got 4 assists this season. I think he probably made that a 5 with his assists for Romain Saiss, although it was with a bit of a kind of goal mouth scramble against Everton at the weekend. So he's already got more assists this season than he managed in the entire last campaign. He's just absolutely breathtaking to watch. So fast, probably the fastest player in football. So skillful, so strong, and he's really kind of, in addition to all those physical qualities, he's like getting his head up and finding some fantastic crosses now as well. And Wolves strikers are absolutely loving it. He's feeding them every opportunity. It's brilliant to watch. And on his day, he's unstoppable. So he's the player I'd think Beşiktaş fans and fans in this Europa League group are gonna, watch and think, wow, and be surprised by him. There are a lot of other good players too. Obviously, you've mentioned a lot of them. For me, a real star in the making is Diogo Jota. He didn't play much in Portugal with Porto, been at Atletico Madrid before. Fantastic to watch over the last 12 months since Nuno's moved him into a more central role as a striker rather than playing off the left. He scored 10 goals in the second half of last season, scored a couple already this season, and looks a real kind of fantastic player now. And there is a feeling at Wolves that Jota's going to be the first to move on of these young Portuguese players, probably ahead of Neves at the moment. A really, really top class player, and he'll definitely go on to grace, the top clubs in European football for sure.
And you mentioned him quite a few times already, Nuno Espirito Santo, the coach, of course, of Wolverhampton. What type of football does he have his team play?
So it's an interesting one, because you speak to people in Portugal about him and they kind of think it's an attacking style of football. I suppose it is, but first and foremost, it's very kind of defensive. They keep a lot of clean sheets. That back three, essentially a back five, the majority of the game. But when they attack, they really go for it and they spring. They're an absolutely fantastic counter-attacking team, built to counter-attack with the wing backs. It's an interesting one because Nuno played 3-4-3 for the first 18 months he was here, and he wouldn't move away from that. But they had a couple of bad results. I think they lost 5 in 6 in winter last year, and then he shifted it to a 3-5-2, moved Jota inside alongside Jimenez, and put an extra man in midfield in the hand of Dennik, the Belgian international. And that allowed Ruben Neves to kind of find space in his quarterback role where he can just pick passes without opposition players being around him to stop him. Wolves have been brilliant since then. I've never seen a team of such football intelligent players. They're so kind of switched on in everything they do defensively and attacking. They can play against the top teams in this country, Chelsea, Man United, Man City, Liverpool, and sit there for 60 minutes of the 90 without the ball and just defend and kind of move across the back line and close space. It's absolutely fantastic to watch, and I've not seen a team like it, so well drilled in everything they do defensively. But when they get the ball, they are devastating. They break so quickly, and everyone knows their jobs. And they've got some fantastic players in midfield. Neves Moutinho, who can, find the passes, the long balls that absolutely tear apart opposition defences. And they've been, particularly in the big games in this country against the teams I've just mentioned, absolutely fantastic, and they've taken them apart. I think there was a stat going around at the end of the last season that in the top 7 league against each other, Wolves finished 3rd. So that tells you how strong they are and how easily they adapt to the big games. And obviously in the Europa League, they are going to be big games every week.
And you just highlighted quite a few of Wolves' strengths, but are there any weaknesses that jump out to you, stuff that they still need to improve on? Where do you think that, for example, Braga, Beşiktaş or Slovan Bratislava will have to look for their opportunities against Wolves?
So far this season, it wasn't particularly a weakness last season. So far this season, the majority of the goals Wolves have conceded have come down the wings. They obviously do play with wing-backs. Adama has been the first choice right wing back for the majority of this season, and Johnny as left wing back, but Ruben Braga is obviously coming from time to time. Matt Doherty's struggling. It was first choice right wing back last season, but he's struggling with a bit of a knee problem, and hasn't played as much. He's not entirely fit yet, and probably for the time being, Adama's going to be first choice. And Adama's not the strongest defensively. We've seen that. He's fantastic going forward, but he's not a natural right back. Doesn't particularly defend well, and teams have had a lot of joy down that side against him. I think one of the goals in the first leg against Torino came down that side. The goal in the second leg came down that side. Everton scored one of their goals down that side with a cross recently in a defeat for Wolves. So that's probably an area down the flanks. Adama doesn't defend that well, and when Ruben Vinagre plays, he's not great defensively either. So really, if those two are in at any given time in the Europa League, then that's probably an opportunity to get at them down the flanks.
And then finally, your expectations for the group. How do you think the group will shape up? Who will finish top? Who will finish bottom? And so on.
I can't claim to have seen much of any of the teams, to be honest. Having looked at the squads and their respective league forms, I think Slovan Bratislava will finish bottom. I think they lost to a DAC Strada recently 5-2, and that's a team that will send some of their kids to effectively on loan. So I'd imagine they'll finish bottom of the group. I'd be surprised they didn't. So obviously it's important for the other teams to get maximum points against them. Looking at the other two teams, I think Beşiktaş are probably a bigger threat to Wolves than Braga. With the players Wolves have got, the Portuguese players, they're going to know how Braga play as well. And obviously a lot of their players are not expecting to go there and win. Braga are massive, a big hitter in the Portuguese league. Wolves will probably have a tougher time against a Sporting or a Porto or a Benfica. So I'd expect Braga to finish 3rd, and then it's obviously Wolves and Beşiktaş battling out for first and second. That game in Beşiktaş, which is Wolves' first away game in early October, that's going to be huge, I think, in deciding how the kind of group pans out. And then, of course, they finish the final game of the group is Wolves at home to Beşiktaş. So, I think it's going to be between those two teams, how Wolves handle the hostile atmosphere in Istanbul, and how Beşiktaş obviously handle it at Molineux. But I think with the players Wolves have got compared to these teams, the money they've spent, the wage bill they've got, I definitely think they should be winning the group. But you never know. Beşiktaş are a very good team, as are Braga, and any of the three could probably go through.
And finally, for those fans of Beşiktaş, Braga, or even Slovan Bratislava deciding to make the trip to England, to Wolverhampton, any trips for those people, something that they have to do in the area? I don't know, I'm not familiar with the area, but is there anything they have to do when they're there?
Nothing they probably have to. It's not really a tourist capital of the world around here, to be fair. It's obviously quite modest, and the people are very proud of it. The Black Country's famous for things like leather and its chips. That's one thing I would say. If you've got any fans coming over that like chips, the chips here are different to anywhere else in the world. They're battered, they're golden chips. So I definitely recommend they have some of the chips. A pint of Bathams as well. The local beer will always go down well. So I definitely get in the pubs, and I definitely have some chips, because you won't experience any chips like it. They're fantastic.
Well, thank you very much, Alex Dicken of Birmingham Live, for his insights on Wolverhampton Wanderers. And please continue to listen to the final part of the episode, where we will discuss Slovan Bratislava. And from pot 4, we have Slovan Bratislava of Slovakia, of course. And joining me right now is Mojmír Staško of Dennik Sport, Daily Sport in Slovakia. Mojmír, thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, thank you.
So we'll be talking about Slovan Bratislava. For starters, let's start immediately with how did they actually manage to qualify for the Europa League this season? How did they do in the domestic competition last season in Slovakia?
Yes, Slovan was a last champion of Slovakia, which was a very important fact for this club. This is the biggest club in Slovakia, and Slovan was founded in 1919. Doesn't mean that in this year it was celebrated a centenary of founding. This is a first thing. Second thing is that Slovan won in 1969 former Cup of Winner Cups. I don't know if you remember this European competition.
Yeah, the Cup Winners' Cup. That's a pretty big deal back then.
Yeah, and Slovan with perfect team defeated in Basel FC Barcelona, and it was 50 years ago. Doesn't mean that one moment was centenary, second moment was anniversary of great triumph. And third things was that was construct new stadium, and it was open in this year. Stadium Tehelné Pole, or National Stadium, with capacity 22,000 spectators. Doesn't mean that the Slovan did maximum to won a Slovakian league. In first qualification round, Slovan played against champion of Montenegro, Sutjeska Nikšić, and it finished with great disappointments, because in the first match Slovan lead 1-0, but in additional time Sutjeska equalized with shot from 25 or 23 meters. In the second match in Nikšić in Montenegro, Slovan lead 1-0 and played slowly, quickly, calmly, but in additional time again Sutjeska equalized, and on penalty shootout Slovan defeated. It was a great disappointment for owners, for fans, for players, and after it was sacked coach Martin Ševela, who was a successful coach in Slovakian conditions, because he won twice a double with AS Trenčín, and to Slovan he came like a young, progressive coach. But team in these two matches against Sutjeska Nikšić had one non-conformity football. Slovan played slowly. Slovan play very bad, and this was no satisfaction to fans. After his sacking was installed a provisory coach, Jan Kozak Jr., because he is a son of former coach of Slovak national team, Jan Kozak Senior. And fans can remember Jan Kozak like a member of Slovak national team in World Cup in South Africa. He was a playmaker of Art Media Bratislava, which was a very great surprise in season 05-06 in Champions League when Artmedia defeated Celtic Glasgow 5-0, when eliminated Partizan Belgrade, and when played in one group of Champions League with FC Porto, with Glasgow Rangers, and with Internazionale Milan, and sensationally won in Porto. And Jan Kozak was a playmaker of this team. He was his general, his brain. In present time was Jan Kozak, retired player, and he was a coach of reserve team of Slovan Bratislava. He did a great chance. In second round of European League, played Slovan with him against champions of Kosova, Feronikeli. He won in both matches, no with great performances, but he won. In next round, he played against the champion of Ireland, Football Club Dundalk, and it was a very great fight in Bratislava. Slovan won 1-0, but played very perfectly and offensively football in Ireland, and in second match won 3-1. Next, he qualified to playoff round of European League, but against Slovan play PAOK Thessaloniki, of course, champion of Greece and great favorite of these both matches. In Bratislava, in first match, it was a normal tactical football. Slovan play with one attacking player, and if very great and maximally personalized midfield of playground, and was scored 0-0 when in last attack of Slovan, a central defender Aventi Miena scored to 1-0. For Greek team it was a very shock, but when he played a second match in Toba, Greece players thought that PAOK qualified to group phase, but Slovan scores lucky goals. Goalkeeper Greif was traditionally perfect, and PAOK Thessaloniki won 3-2. Doesn't mean that Slovan Bratislava was qualified to European League to group phase. It's about qualification.
And it's a huge win, not to be underestimated. PAOK were very narrowly eliminated by Ajax in the Champions League qualifiers, and they were very unlucky that there wasn't VAR. Actually, I think with VAR, PAOK could have actually been in the Champions League group stages, and then to go out, of course, against Slovan Bratislava. That's not a small feat for Slovan to knock out the unbeaten champions of Greece last season. We mustn't forget that they won both the Cup and the League in Greece last season, didn't lose a single match. So a really big accomplishment from Slovan Bratislava, meaning they should not be underestimated in this group, even though the other three teams in the group are clearly favorites for those top two spots. But Slovan Bratislava could provide a surprise, as Mojmír just pointed out very accurately.
I watched both matches of PAOK against Ajax, and I think that against Ajax PAOK played more better like against Slovan. I don't know if was a moment some opinion that we are a bigger favorite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, underestimation probably.
Yeah.
But that's the danger with these types of teams when you go into these matches as a bigger, well, not a bigger club, because obviously Slovan Bratislava are a big club. Like you pointed out, they have a 100-year history, won the Cup Winners' Cup, have a huge history as a club. But obviously in today's modern football in the scene, if you look at clubs like Wolverhampton, who have a market value of 300 million, more than 300 million, and obviously those kind of clubs will expect to beat Slovan Bratislava, but they shouldn't take it for granted. because then you can end up with a nasty surprise like PAOK, and like PAOK ended up being the unbeaten champions of Greece, yet not in Europe this season because they got knocked out in the qualifiers. So Mojmír, thank you very much for that, but can you point us out a couple of key players for Slovan Bratislava that the teams that Braga, Beşiktaş and Wolverhampton will need to be careful for, because they could hurt them potentially?
In my opinion, Slovan were no chance to qualify to group phase without a young goalkeeper Dominik Greif. In my opinion, it was a key person of success in qualifiers rounds. He has 22 years, but he has a ability of experiences goalkeeper. In my opinion, he is like a goalkeeper from South countries in style of goalkeeping. He is like Spanish or like Portugal goalkeeper. In summer, Portugal FC Porto had a great interesting about him, but Slovan didn't sell him. He is very talented youngster, and I think that he will have a great future in some interesting club. Next person is from other side, from attack, and it is a Slovenian attacker, Andras Šporar. He is a member of Slovenian national team. He came to Slovan Bratislava from Switzerland football club Basel, but with poor form. And this poor form was seen in his first year in Slovakia, but in second year in Slovan Bratislava he scored, and with 29 goals he was a best goal scorer of Slovakian top league, but it was a record in number of goals, because only two players in history of Slovakian league scored 29 goals. Robert Semeník 15 years ago, and now Andras Šporar. Interesting for Turkish fans is that Trabzonspor won't buy him in summer, and we had information that Trabzonspor had a possibility to pay 2.5 million euros for him, but Slovan don't accept it. Player said that he won't stay in Slovan Bratislava and he won't play in Slovan. In defending line is central defender Valery Božíkov, in many matches captain of Slovan. He is stability member of Bulgaria national team. Now is a new player, Menti Abena from Netherlands. I spoke him about like a goal scorer of important goal against PAOK in hometown. Very interesting players are in midfield. David Holman, national team of Hungary. Now interesting for Slovakian fans because we played against Hungary in qualifiers to Euro. Nono is former player of Betis Sevilla, too in midfield. Ibrahim Rabiu, national team of Nigeria. Rafael Rata of Brazilian midfield, who was coming from Ukrainian Zorya Luhansk to Slovan Bratislava. Interesting player is Joëri Descamps from Netherlands. He is player who is living and playing in Slovakia 5 years, and now some people think about him like a possibility member of Slovak national team, because he played 5 years here. He's living in Bratislava, and it's a possibilities with UEFA and FIFA conditions. Moha is very technical players from Morocco. He played on left wing. Sometimes very individual. Sometimes it's problem. Sometimes it's a great thing. But generally, this is a team. This is a team which is from many foreign players. Sometimes Slovakian fans has problem that in this Slovakian team aren't Slovak players. But now when Slovan is in a group phase, it's no problem.
And of course, for Beşiktaş fans, they will remember Filip Hološko, who played for Slovan Bratislava a couple of years ago. I believe he's in the Czech league now, but he played 2 seasons for Slovan Bratislava too. So that's something that jumped out to me when following his career in recent years, that he played there for 2 seasons. So let's talk a little bit about your expectations of... before we do that, actually, let's talk a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses that you see this team have. What are their biggest weapons going into this group stage? How do you expect Slovan Bratislava maybe to take some points? Do they have a strong home reputation? Are they good on the counter, stuff like that? And then where do you think that Wolves, Beşiktaş and Braga will... have the best chances of exploiting Slovan Bratislava's weaknesses?
The draw of this group was very tough, and generally Slovan is in other position like next 3 clubs, because target of Slovan Bratislava was a group phase. Doesn't mean that Slovan is on the point of target. Braga, Beşiktaş and Wolverhampton have some other ideas, and they won't qualify to next rounds. Slovan don't think about this idea. I think that a main target Slovan in qualifier in this group will be take more points, but Slovan will be satisfied with 4 points, 5 points, 6 points. I think that generally in this club nobody think about next rounds. I think that this group is very tough to Slovan in conditions of style of play, because Portugal Braga is a danger with its style of play. Wolverhampton, when you see to roster of this team, it's no English team. It's a team from South, with many Portugal players, and I think that best opponent to take a points will be Turkish Beşiktaş, with still of pride for Slovan Bratislava. Yes, of course. In games against these all 3 clubs will be Slovan in position of underdogs. But it is a very great advantage because Slovan has a quality team with perfect individualities. I talk about Greif, I talk about Sporar, I talk about Božíkov. They are members of national teams, similar like players of Beşiktaş, which are members of Turkish national team or some other national teams. Doesn't mean that Slovan had a chance. And I see that he is in some psychical advantage because nobody think about some great targets. I don't know if you understand.
I understand you perfectly. They are satisfied. They have already reached their target by getting to the Europa League group stages, and now they have the advantage of being the underdog, hoping maybe that there will be some underestimation from the opponents, and they have the psychological advantage from that aspect. So I think you got your point across perfectly there. So let's finish with our last football-related question. What are your expectations for the group? Who do you think will end in first place, second place, third place, and fourth place? And how do you think Slovan Bratislava will fare overall in the group, regardless of the position they will end in?
The last season was a very great surprise in English Premier League, Wolverhampton Wanderers, and I think that it can be a black horse of this group because they had a very good coach, very good team with João Moutinho and etc. Sporting Braga won against Power Spartak Moscow. It's a great signal to other participants of this group. Beşiktaş, it's a great club. Slovan finish on the 4th position. I have an idea about some better position, because I think that in reality Slovan won't take from 2 to 5 points. I think that Beşiktaş will be in hard position in this group because style of play of Braga and Wolverhampton Wanderers, it's very difficult. In my eyes, can be one from 2 qualifiers to next round. Braga. I know this team. I know style of play, and I think that about second place, I don't want to say about second position. We'll fight Beşiktaş and Wolverhampton, but I don't know. It will be about fighting. It will be about battle. 3 teams to qualified places.
Yeah, and also, of course, how much they want to go through. Wolverhampton may prioritize the league. Beşiktaş may prioritize the league. Braga is generally a club that, they don't really have a real opportunity for the title. I'm not saying Wolves do either, but they may want to get their Champions League spot for next season. So it's all going to end up depending on how serious each club will take this battle. Just a quick statistic, which is very interesting. I think Wolverhampton Wanderers came out of pot 3. It's probably the club that everyone wanted to avoid, though, because like I alluded to earlier, their total net value, according to transfermarkt.com, which obviously should be taken with a pinch of salt, but their total market value is 307,750,000 euros. That's more than all 3 of the other teams in the group combined. Beşiktaş are at only 84.45 million. Obviously, they had a lot of star players leave, older star players, and they got of younger players, so their market value dropped. And then Braga are on 101.75 million, and then Slovan Bratislava at 11.7 million. Now, obviously, again, take it with a pinch of salt, but for example, Beşiktaş's most valuable player, Adem Ljajic, is worth 12 million. That's more than Slovan Bratislava's squad on paper. Braga's most valuable player, Ricardo Horta, is worth 9 million, and then of course for Wolves, Ruben Neves is worth a whopping 45 million, which is more than half of the value of Beşiktaş's team, for example. So this is a really tricky group. I think 3 teams that are going to want to vie for those top 2 spots, but with a very dangerous underdog in Slovan Bratislava that have already upset PAOK Thessaloniki, who are arguably of a similar level than a Braga or a Beşiktaş. So yeah, it's definitely not a match that should be taken for granted. Mojmír, thank you very much for your insights on the team. But finally, do you have any tips for fans of Beşiktaş, Braga or Wolves that decide to make the trip to Slovakia, to Bratislava? Is there anything they should do when they're in town? Maybe something that you can recommend of a local dish or something, or any sites that they need to go seeing if they're there for an extra day or so?
For beginning, now Slovan Bratislava has one problem. He is in disciplinary process in UEFA, because when he played against Kosovian champion Feronikeli, some ultras group had a transparent with political slogans against Kosovo and on the side of Serbian tradition of Kosovo, And Slovan paid a fine in 50,000 euro, but now we listen about rumors that a first match in group will be close. It will be without spectators. Now we are on the official base, because it's a possibility of a disciplinary platform and a ban for one match. But interesting was that in official Twitter of Wolverhampton Wanderers was informations about 2 matches. First match in Bratislava play Beşiktaş Istanbul, and I think that it will be match without fans of Beşiktaş, without fans of Slovan Bratislava. We have awaited for information from UEFA, but I think for 99% that ban will be for a first match. I hope that it will be no for a second match. That is a key information. And what about visiting fans? Bratislava is a very nice city with no big old center, old city. It's very interesting with squares, with little streets. It's a typical Central European town from medieval times. I think that who will coming to Bratislava, he will be satisfied. Of course, in Slovakia is for fans from England, from Portugal, from France, from Germany. Everything cheap. Yeah, cheap beer, cheap meals, cheap accommodations. I think that's Bratislava is very good place to visiting, to touristic. Near is Vienna, some 50 kilometers near is Budapest. Doesn't mean when you have a time 3 or 4 days you can visit some other interesting places. We have a very interesting place in West Slovakia, castles and etc. I think that it will be nice trip for all fans, but with 1K informations that first match will be closed for fans, unfortunately.
Well, let's hope the away fans are allowed, but that might be possible indeed that they aren't allowed either. I believe that the Trabzonspor fans weren't allowed against Sparta Prague, for example, and I don't think they were allowed in Greece either against AEK Athens, when those two teams also had bans for their home matches. But for those of you Wolverhampton fans, and for those of you from Braga, cheap beer, cheap accommodations, and a beautiful medieval style city from typical Central Europe. Who doesn't want to go and do that? So definitely go and book a trip to Bratislava to watch the away game. That sounds like a lot of fun. Mojmír, I want to thank you very much for your insights on the club Slovan Bratislava, and of course on your travel tips. But this is the end of our episode previewing UEFA Europa League's Group K, featuring Beşiktaş, Sporting Braga, Wolverhampton Wanderers, and as you just heard, Slovan Bratislava. I want to thank all our expert analysts who came onto the show today. Please check the show notes where you can find their Twitter handles. You can give them a follow. It's a great way of showing your support for the podcast by showing our guests your appreciation. Go tell them how much you like this episode or the previous episodes of Football Turka featuring Trabzonspor and Beşiktaş's group, or our upcoming episode that will feature Galatasaray's Champions League group. So if you want to support Football a la Turca, or you want to support the Black Eagles podcast, head over to www.patreon.com/Falt, FALT is how it's spelled, so just abbreviation of Football a la Turca. Or you want to support us in a non-financial way, that's perfectly possible too. Just drop us a 5-star review on iTunes. And you know what, the most important thing you can do, the best way you can help us is not by going on to Patreon, that's great, it helps too, but the best way is just by helping us grow, and that's by spreading the word, retweeting whenever we release a new episode on either Football a la Turca or on the Black Eagles podcast. Just spread the word, tell your friends, tell your family. If you're in school, you have some Turkish friends who are interested in Turkish football, or just friends in general interested in Turkish football, tell them about Football a la Turca. If you know any Beşiktaş fans, tell them about Beşiktaş. If you're going into the Turkish barber this week or next week or the week after, tell them, hey, have you heard this new thing? It's amazing. Football a la Turca, the Black Eagles podcast. Tell everyone, spread the word. And you know what, if you have family back home in Turkey, for example, young cousins, nieces, nephews, whatever, who are trying to learn English, Football a la Turca is a great way. The Black Eagles podcast is a great way to learn English. The best way, the way I learned English, is just by watching television back in the day, because here in Belgium, back in the day, television wasn't dubbed. A great way to learn English is just by listening to it, not constantly, but listening to it and watching movies that aren't dubbed, but also listening to podcasts like this, and especially with a familiar topic like Turkish football. It's a great way for people in Turkey to improve their own English. So even if you're not a huge fan of what we have to say about football, you know what, maybe people can just learn some new English. So anyway, that's a little bit off topic, but it's a great way. And like I said, that's the best way you can support the podcasts, is by just spreading the word and helping us grow, which will increase our opportunities to do episodes like these with very good expert analysts on the show more often. And what else do you want but great content? Thank you all for listening to this episode of the Black Eagles podcast. And don't forget to check out our earlier episodes on Football a la Turca as well. And of course, our transfer extravaganza episode that dropped this past Saturday, which features expert analysis of our latest 4 transfers: Victor Ruiz, Mohamed El Nene, George Kevin Nkudu, and finally Abdoulaye Diaby, who I think many Beşiktaş fans were a little worried about. Is he a striker? Is he a winger? All of that gets answered in our previous episode of the Black Eagles podcast. Thank you for listening and see you again soon.
Beşiktaş International hopes you enjoyed this program.